Yay, we did it. Awesome. All right. So, welcome to everybody on Facebook Live and on the Zoom. Jason, glad to see that you joined with us. Oh, and here comes Emily, Dr. Schindler. Hey, there we go. As we get started on this rainy day for most of us, I think. All right. Hi, Emily. How you doing?
Okay, how are you?
Perfect.
My my apologies for being late. I had this at 10 a.m. PT, and that's not right. That's incorrect.
Oh, it's all
So,
good. It's all good. I when I work with international doing different things, we always
mm,
mess up time zones and it's always difficult. So, but glad to have you. So, we actually just got started.
great.
Yeah, so no worries there. So we're on the Facebook website or Facebook page for Teaching with Comics, and see Jason's here. Jason's awesome in the audience. And then as people come in, we'll let them in. We'll also record to YouTube and share the link. And then Carl from the Will Eisner Foundation will also post this there as well. So all the resources, all the things that we talk about will be there forever, as they say. Um, so why don't we go ahead and get started? We'll kind of do our own introductions. I think that's always easiest. And so we'll just kind of the order that I had for introductions will be Matthew and then Emily and then Tim. And then after that with the questions and things. And I have questions, but we can talk about anything wherever the conversation goes to. And I apologize, I'm not my normal self. I have a little bit of a migraine. I think a lot of it has to do with with the weather and things like that. So but getting started. So I'm Tim Smythe. I am the author of one book so far, Teaching with Comics and Graphic Novels. And last year was nominated for an Eisner Award. So I was really happy when the Eisner Foundation reached out and asked if we would put some things together for the Will Eisner Celebration Week, because of course his birthday is next week. And so that's a whole week of celebration for comics and literacy and Eisner and all these different things. So I am a high school social studies teacher. I started the day after 9/11, so that was always a eye-opening experience, but I really saw how education helped bring people together. I have three children, all of whom have learned to read through comics and graphic novels, and they are my oldest is off to college next year as a history major, so I'm really excited about that. And I run the teachingwithcomics.com website and Facebook page, and get to go around the country and do professional development at libraries and schools and universities, and all about using comics as literacy. So that's me. So Matthew, if you could introduce yourself. And
Yeah, sure. So, my name is Matthew Noe. I'm a collection management librarian at Harvard Medical School. I know that might sound weird for comics, but we have this cool thing called graphic medicine. So where it's all about like comics that have themes around health and illness, or using comics as a teaching tool, for all sorts of reasons with medical students and with patients and beyond. Um, I am a former president for the American Library Association's Graphic Novels and Comics Roundtable. I'm the current treasurer for the Graphic Medicine International Collective. It's this group of us who run the graphic medicine website, as well as give out awards to books and offer scholarships and all sorts of resources. So I encourage you to check that out. Um, yeah, and I'm the treasurer for the Worcester Public Library, so I'm both a librarian and a library board trustee, so if you're I'm sure book bans will come up at some point, but if you're as Tim's wearing his shirt, right? If you're opposed to that stuff, and you want to help fight the fight, go run for your local library board. Oh, and I've written a bunch of book chapters and a couple of articles and things. That's the academic library life. But my favorite thing is I wrote the foreword to the Eisner nominated. I don't have my sticker on this copy. Eisner nominated and all sorts of other awarded things, Ripple Effects, out from Fanbase Press, which is a work of graphic medicine, and I highly recommend you check it out. I promise I earn nothing from this. It's just I love the book so much that I was willing to write a foreword for it. Um, so yeah, that's me.
all right, and then we had Emily.
Hi, my name is Dr. Emily Schindler. I'm the Director of Education at the Comic-Con Museum here in San Diego in Balboa Park. Prior to this work, I was in academia as an educational researcher, researching creativity and learning, and also how educators learn in innovative environments at UC Irvine, and before that at the University of Wisconsin-Madison. So yeah, my daily work right now is building an education center that teaches people how or helps people convene when they are learning through popular arts. So that includes graphic novels and comics, but also TV, film, animation, any of those, anything that you can think of that brings you joy. We actually we try to find a way to teach into it. So far, the museum has only been in existence since November of 2021, and I came aboard in May of 2022. So we're just coming up on 2 years here. But we've served thousands of students in field trips, one of which is called Comics 101, where we teach kids what a comic is, and teachers most of the time what a comic is, and how you might use it as a medium to express yourself. Very basic stuff. But we're really working on growing into, more advanced topics as well, and growing that audience. So please check us out at comic-con.org. And yeah, you can learn more about the museum and all the great things we're doing. Thanks for having me here today.
Yeah, and I have to say, I had the privilege of going there to the San Diego Comic-Con Museum over the summer with my kids, and I completely lost them for hours with all the animation and all the stories and all the learning. And I love the learning lab that you have upstairs. And if you have a chance to stop by, it definitely needs to be on your list if you're out in San Diego.
Yes, please. We would love it. And give me a heads up if you're coming. I will try to make it special for you.
There you go. All right, and then Tim.
Hi, I'm Tim Ogline. Thanks, Tim, for the cue there. I am from the Greater Philadelphia area. I am a illustrator, graphic designer, and graphic novelist. I've taught at the Tyler School of Art, Moore College of Art, and also my most recent books. I have a book, Ben Franklin for Beginners. I wrote and illustrated from For Beginners books. And my recent graphic novel, We Survived the Holocaust. Thank you, Tim. We had great blurb from you. Really appreciate it. This is in collaboration with Frank Baker, the lead writer on this project. And that was just named to the ELSA Great Graphic Novels for Teens list for 2024. So we're pretty happy about that. And yeah, I'm just very pleased to be here with this company and talk about something that we all love, this medium. So thank you very much. Look forward to our conversation.
Yeah, I feel bad. I had your book and I left it at school. I have 3 copies in my classroom. We were just doing a lesson.
Oh, that's great.
Yeah, for like 2 days where I put all kinds of books and graphic novels and comics from World War II and the Holocaust. And then the kids just spent 2 days reading and going through, and they absolutely loved your book.
Oh,
It
that's
was one of the ones
fantastic. Thank you.
that we very much talked about. And I did a little scientific study. It was 82% of students out of my 3 classes picked up a comic book first before they picked up a more traditional book. So there you have it, right?
I saw that post. I thought that was really encouraging in our new world here.
Yes. And the kids, they no phones, didn't listen to music, they were talking to each other. They didn't feel so. I have kids of all different reading levels, different languages, and the comic books and the graphic novels, and just picture books, kids books, all kinds of different things. And it was just a way to kind of have a community, no matter the skill level of the kids.
Yeah,
And
yeah.
then they come up with a ton of questions, and then we launch into World War II, and so we'll start that next week. So
I love it how their comics are now kind of an accepted pastime. When I was a kid, it was you basically try to hide it because you're essentially a nerd, if you read comics. And I'm really happy that literacy has taken this turn.
yeah, we'll get to questions in a second, but I say that all the time is like I grew up in Philadelphia and went to Philadelphia public schools,
Yeah.
and you know, I loved hip hop and comics. Those are my two things. And so I could talk about Public Enemy and all that kind of stuff,
Yeah.
no problem. And I never mentioned to anybody that I read comic books because I
Sure.
was afraid I'd get my ass beat, right?
Right.
Like so it's but now my students and my own children are proud to be called nerds. It's a whole different world, and I'm so glad
Yeah. Yeah.
that we've gotten to this point, right?
Absolutely.
And I think that's a good segue to talk about Will Eisner, who helped us to get to this point. And so, of course, as we thank Carl and Nancy Gropper and the Will Eisner Family Foundation for kind of hosting all this, and internationally, people are doing events over the next week or so. If you look them up on Facebook or on their website. And I also put a list on my website, which is teachingwithcomics.com, right on the top of the waffle. The very first link is a document of links that we'll be talking about, things that people in the panels have shared with me, different resources. Yes, Chuck D is writing comics. And so, I'm sorry, and so is Daryl McDaniels, DMC. Daryl makes comics. So, great aside. So anyway, on my website, teachingwithcomics.com, there's free comics, there's lesson plans, there's resources from the ALA graphic novel roundtable. There's all sorts of things there, and it just says Will Eisner celebration. If you click on that link, there's all kinds of great things for educators and parents and things like that. So this one I'll talk a little bit about, and then I'll just kind of turn it to the group. We can go in whatever order or as we feel. But again, going to you know, the Eisner Awards, where I saw Matthew and lots of other great folks this past summer. And my kids got to go to it, and like what a cool night for literacy as we were talking about comics and graphic novels and all these things that we do. So I use Will Eisner. In fact, we're starting to use this week
Mhm.
the plot in my classroom. And so this book is a graphic interpretation of the secret story of the protocols of the elders of Zion. So of course it's, and well, I'll read you some of his words here. Will Eisner says, I grew up during the Great Depression, experienced prejudice, painful incidents, and indignities that often befell Jews in our society at that time. I remember being angry at the attitude of my parents who advised that we should be quiet and not offend the Goyim. To them, the Holocaust was another, only much bigger pogrom. That's really powerful words. And he says that he was curious about where did all this come from. And so this is one of those documents that of course was and is still promoted by white supremacy groups, anti-Semitic groups, of being a historical document of the elders, the Jewish elders, who of course are intelligent enough to come up with a plan to take over the world, but apparently are dumb enough to leave it laying out for people to find. And I've seen it. And so when I talk to my students about AI, for instance, you know, what's to stop AI from pulling something like this and using it as historical fact? And so then he says, over the years, hundreds of books and competent scholarly articles have exposed the infamy of the protocols. These studies, however, are written mostly by academics and are designed to be read by scholars. I spent my career in the application of sequential art as a form of narrative language. With the widespread acceptance of the graphic narrative as a vehicle of popular literature, there's now an opportunity to deal head on with this propaganda in a more accessible language. And I think his own words really speak very well to the power of the comics medium of bringing this to a new audience. My AP students, especially, when you first give them a comic book, they kind of, you know, my advanced placement students, they kind of turn their nose up on it a little bit. But we've learned about Das Kapital, we've learned about Marx, the Communist Manifesto, and now we'll be reading this from Will Eisner this week. And it reaches them in a way that you just can't do with traditional prose. You can't throw something like the plot. You can't throw the Communist Manifesto at a kid and expect them to really be able to internalize all these types of things without building that background knowledge first. And so those words from Will Eisner, I think, just speak really powerfully. And then two others that I use in my classroom, Kings in Disguise. And so, of course, as a person who knows a lot, Will Eisner knows a lot about the Great Depression, being able to visualize that. And then I also would say a great one to use is Will Eisner, Comics and Sequential Art, kind of the handbook for drawing and what sequential art is, and you know, all those different things. And it's just fantastic resources that we can all use. So his legacy to me is personal because I do use his materials in my classroom, and it always has a really powerful impact with my own students. So feel free to just unmic, or if we want to stick with the same order, whatever is easier. What does Will Eisner mean to the rest of you guys?
You jump in since we'll wind up in the same order at the beginning
Yeah,
because it's
yeah.
the safest, I think.
Perfect.
I mean, so for me, the first thing that comes to mind when I think about Will Eisner is, probably the awards. That's how I first heard the name, right? And then I jumped back and, read some of his books and everything. Um, and like I think the legacy piece more than his individual works are what I think about a lot is like through the foundation, the graphic novels and comics roundtable is able to give out these collection development awards each year, which has a connection to graphic medicine because one of the very first ones that was awarded was to Ypsilanti District Library in Michigan, which was the first public library to build a graphic medicine specific collection. And they did it using funds from this Will Eisner Foundation award money, right? So that's like this full circle. And then I go, um, it's I promise I'm not trying to say anything negative here, okay? But it often comes across that way because, so Will did a lot of work for hire stuff in his life because you're a cartoonist and you got to survive. Um, and an example of how we might use the power of comics for less good purposes, is he created this comic with the lobbying arm of the Old American Medical Association to oppose single payer health care called Waiting Room, The Sad Case of Waiting Room Willie. It's ridiculous. And it's like, if we have nationalized healthcare, you're gonna never see your doctor and it'll be terrible. And it came out like in the 40s, 50s. And so it's an example I use all the time when I'm introducing the power of comics to students. Like, you can use this for amazing things and educational things, but it can also be used because it's so powerful and can spread information so well. You have to be careful about how you use it. So like to get nerdy and Spider-Man-y, right? With great power comes great responsibility. I mean, that's kind of the whole thing. So yeah, that's where I'm usually thinking about Will Eisner is like amazing cartoonist, amazing books and everything, and his legacy carries on through awards and the foundation's work, and it also gives us an opportunity to have cautionary tales, right? So yeah.
I love that because I share an image from the Philadelphia Inquirer, and it was shared in a lot of newspapers during World War II, where it was depicting Chinese who were our allies and Japanese who are our enemies, and the racial depictions of the Japanese are just absolutely horrendous. So that's a fantastic point, and I'd never heard of the Waiting Room Willie. So I'm going to take a look. That's fascinating. Thank you. All right, so then I guess in our order, then let's just keep going with that. I think that is easiest. Emily?
Yeah, so to be fully transparent, you know, I a daily occurrence for me is, realizing all the things I don't yet know. I am the convener of many nerds who come to me and are like, oh, you have to learn about this. So it's a wonderful thing. So I am still learning about Will Eisner, but and his legacy. And so I'm really excited to hear from you all about it. However, I will say that in the short time that I've been at the Comic-Con Museum and really started digging into this, one person who is carrying his legacy at Comic-Con is Jackie Estrada.
Oh, yeah.
So for those who might not know, she is the person who has been running the Eisner Awards since the 70s, or actually since the 90s, sorry. And she's been at Comic-Con since the 70s. But what I love about her, just personally, having, had a few interactions with her, is how she makes space for women to be here. And that is not always, again, in my job, that isn't always right away evident. And so I have just really loved how she entered the community, saw a need, used her skills to make a space where we could lift each other up. And that, so that's the legacy for me at this point.
I love that so much. I honestly, I wasn't really aware of, I hate to say this too, of who Jackie was until I went out to San Diego. And I mean, she's emailed me back and she's all kind. And I was like, when I realized who she was, and she's such a nice person and was really super helpful for me and my family, between like helping with hotels and where to go and making sure that they sent some nomination stickers my way so I could put them on my book. Like, she's just the sweetest woman. So I think that's really awesome that you bring her up.
Yeah, there's no Eisner Awards without her.
Right.
For serious. And she really just is very unassuming. She's wonderful. She's curated a couple of exhibits for our museum, and every woman who works at Comic-Con and who has for a long time will point to her as a giant mentor for us. So
That's fantastic. All right, and then Tim, about Will Eisner.
Yeah, it's like because as a teenager, I was like, I mean, I was, I was like growing up with comics, at that time I was like really into Frank Miller and like, John Byrne, George Perez, Alan Moore, and I was starting to like really kind of explore kind of that, deeper level, more impactful storytelling. And, through the Bud Plant catalog, I discovered, Will Eisner stuff, and still remember reading A Contract with God. It was like, that just knocked me over. This absolutely was a complete game changer in my relationship to comics, right? It's like this is different storytelling. It's like Alan Moore is one level, but this is like, just stories of just like normal people, in our mundane little struggles, and it's just brilliant storytelling. And so yeah, I went down the rabbit hole with Eisner work at that time. I was reading the Will Eisner Reader, the quarterly, of all the Spirit collections and whatnot. And in terms of Spirit, I remember I first saw the Will Schnabel story, right? That was reproduced in the Smithsonian Book of Comic Book Comics, which is one of Eisner's favorites. It's just like just the storytelling and the panel layout and the design, the typography, it just fired on all cylinders. And as ultimately as I've become like an illustrator and designer, that was really that really appealed to me. It's like that whole sense of just storytelling. And yeah, I just really have always just admired the work. And I was rereading the plot this morning as well, and just a brilliant body of work, and so apt that award is named for him. And and that he's really kind of defined this medium as something more than just four color, direct by hacks on a deadline on newsprint, right? So yeah. And we all end up doing stuff that we regret for hire. I mean, I remember doing a interactive CD, which was for one of those companies that help fuel subprime lending crisis. So when they're with the wave of the money, yeah, you don't really know what the danger is in what you're doing until it until it materializes.
Yeah, I hear that, and it's funny because it sounds like we're all kind of doing a little bit of learning of Will Eisner himself, and I learned a lot from Carl. Like, we were going back and forth, and I was like, hey, what are some themes? And he was mentioning about, of course, anti-Semitism in his work, and he said The Heart of the Storm, which is based on Eisner's experiences during World War II, and I have not read that yet. And then, of course, Fagin the Jew, which is based on Oliver Twist, but with a different viewpoint. And I've used his book. Was it the PS magazine?
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, for soldiers in World War II, and kind of, and even after World War II, explaining the different things from the U.S. military, but putting it in a graphic format. Exactly. So that's awesome. So yeah, so thank you. So that's a great way to kind of talk about Eisner, and kind of where we're starting off with. And before we get to our next question, which is, the basic, like, why'd you get into comic books? What's your origin story? What do they mean to you? In the free resources, like I mentioned, on teachingwithcomics.com at the top, The very first source is Carl sent me a teacher's guide and excerpts from the plot from the Anti-Defamation League that was all kindly put together and said that we could share that with everybody. So if you're looking to, use something in your classroom the next day, that is right there for you to use, and it's a fantastic resource. So again, thank you to Carl and the Eisner Foundation. So, I guess we'll stick with the same format. So I'll talk a little bit, and then Matthew, Emily, and Tim, and this is probably the one we could talk a lot about. But your comics origin story, because I do think it's important to talk about that, because I have a lot of high school kids who I have to teach how to read comics. And that's really important because a lot of them have never read a comic before. And as much as that breaks my heart,
Yeah.
I hear this story from a lot of people of how comics saved them as a kid. And so I share that own personal story. For me, we'll just say I had a really rough childhood. I had to deal with some abuse and things like this. And I was reading these stories about these superheroes who all have this awful origin story. And particularly for me was the X-Men. And this idea that they're ostracized from their families, that they are seen as the other. In some cases, they're kicked out of their homes, and they find this place where rather than give up, they find a family. They choose a family. And I always thought that was a fascinating idea. And I say that a lot as an adult, that family is who you make it. Yes, you have a biological family, but you can also choose. And I say this to my students all the time, you can choose your family and who you want to be with as well. And they didn't give up, right? Like Bruce Wayne doesn't give up, and Peter Parker doesn't give up. They go through the mistakes, they work through the guilt, and yet they want to make the world a better place, even though for them they have every single reason to believe that the world is just this awful place that will let you down. But they want to make it a better place. And it sounds so cheesy to say it, but I found a lot of personal inspiration in the stories for exactly that. It's like, okay, get through this stage in your life, go out into the world. And it's why I wanted to become a teacher. I wanted to be that person that I needed when I was a kid. And it's why I loved having like a pop culture club and a comic book club at my school. God, I wish I had that safe space when I was a kid. And it is a space that is so loud. There's so many arguments. There's so much passion. We had to buy Molianor so you can only speak if you're holding the hammer. And we have signs up like you are not allowed to ask what's better, Marvel or DC. Like there's just certain topics that we know that you can't ask. So again, for me, it's super duper personal, and I see the impact in my classroom. And then also real briefly, I always tell the story about my son Liam, who's my own personal superhero. He has this really rare form of meningitis, and he has been hospitalized more times than I care to talk about. And it's why when Matthew held up Ripple Effects, that comic speaks volumes to me, because this comic is about people with invisible illnesses, and it becomes a superpower. And so I read this with my son, and a few tears, I have to be honest. But he has severe nerve pain, migraines, fatigue. He has every reason to not want to go to school. And when he was in kindergarten at a Montessori school, he was termed a reluctant reader in kindergarten, because he didn't want to read certain types of books, these Bob board books, which are fine. But for my son, there wasn't enough story. It wasn't what he was interested in. And so because of all this, I went back to school to get my certificate as my degree as a reading specialist. And I was the only high school teacher in the whole program. They didn't know what to do with me. The idea that we only teach reading in elementary school. And I was the only male too, and so talking to my professors, and I wound up writing my thesis on using comics and pop culture to create engaged, analytical, emotionally responsible students, because my professors were super awesome and open-minded. And so now I take that into my classroom. So sorry if that was a little personal, but Matthew, get me off the hot seat. How about you?
Get you off the hot seat. Yeah, no, I'm always happy to listen to people's stories like that and how there's a powerful impact with the comics, right? And I remember you messaged me after reading Ripple Effects to tell me that, and that was just, I was so anxious about putting my honest experience in that forward that it meant a lot for me to hear back that it was helpful. Because I understand the nerve pain. That's what I deal with every day. Is I have a chronic pain condition. It came on when I was like 16 and has, it's not as bad as it was, but there's no going away with it, right? Like the nerve pain's just forever, unless we magically, find solutions that don't exist yet. But no one implant anything into their brain that Elon Musk is selling, because that's been touted as like a potential medical thing, and I'm like, no, do not do that. That's a supervillain origin story right there. But a comic book reader origin story. Um, I actually did not grow up reading comics, which surprises people sometimes. I grew up in rural Kentucky. There was no comic book store. My introduction to all the characters that we know was through cartoons in the 90s, like the Spider-Man cartoon and X-Men, which we're getting X-Men 97, and I'm excited about. And so like that's how I knew about all these characters, and the Justice League from the 2000s. Like Martian Manhunter remains my favorite superhero because of that show. Um, and I'm always depressed there aren't more good Martian Manhunter comics out there. There are surprisingly few. But so my origin for actually reading comics is starts with I got into anime as a kid, as a teenager in the early 2000s, which then led to um please no one arrest me. I was the teenager who read scans of manga online, and that's how I got into reading comics at all. Um I could not tell you what my first like American comic reading experience was. But when I really got into it was right about the time I started grad school for my library science degree. And my wife and I had just started dating about a year before, and she was a comics reader. And then I became a comics reader. And it just kind of lined up perfectly with a time where I was studying to be a health sciences librarian and thinking about health literacy. And it immediately was like, oh, hold on, there's something here. So it went from, I just went all in with it, all in as a personal hobby, all in as a professional activity, and it's just been running with it since. And behind me is all of my non-comic books. On the other side of the room is just like 6 bookshelves worth of comics, and it's a problem. We don't have enough room for all of this. Um, but yeah, so and so I'm always trying to encourage people, you didn't have to grow up reading comics. You can come to this at any point, at any time. It's fine. You can make a career out of it no matter what age you're at too. So yeah, that's me.
I love that, because a lot of times people are intimidated. You walk into a comic store, you've never read a comic before, and it's like, I don't even know Batman number 8,437,000. Where do I start? Just ask the comic book people, like they'll tell you. It's a
And
really
I think that's Yeah, I think that's part of why the manga was so appealing, because it was, and it still is, it's so much easier to jump into manga because the numbering is consistent and stable. Like there might be 8.5 million volumes of One Piece, but you don't have to jump through 18 different writers and sub stories and events and everything else.
great. Thank you. Emily, how about you?
So, I'm noticing an interesting trend. I'm a researcher, that's what I do. But I am, so my story started with, I read comics as a kid, I played video games, I was, but this is all pre-internet. So this was just, and I grew up in Milwaukee. And really just my friends and I were just nerds, like there wasn't, we collected baseball cards, we went to comic shops, we, played hours and hours of Nintendo and read the media that came, Game Informer and all of the things that came along with that. I read Archie comics because that was what I could get in the grocery store. And we had to get a parent to take us to a comic shop. That was really hard to do, but I could ride my bike to the grocery store and buy my own Archie comics. And so that's what I did. Although, I don't know if you've read an Archie comic recently. Eventually, I grew out of those stories because I was like, listen, why is everybody obsessed with this Archie guy? He is not that great. We got ladies losing their minds here. What's going on? Anyway, sorry Archie lovers. I do it will always have a place in my heart. But at that point, also, I stopped playing video games and reading comics and, engaging, identifying boldly as a nerd in, about 6th grade, when I realized that there were consequences to that love and that identification socially. And then additionally, I always tell the story of there was a moment when I went from playing video games to sitting on the couch and watching boys play video games. And I remember that specifically being like, yeah, okay, I'm not allowed to play because I'm probably not good enough because I am a girl. So I will just stand here and support people. And then obviously, I went, nobody can live like that. So I moved on into other interests. However, fast forward, 15 years, I became an English teacher. And I am trained as a secondary English teacher. Tim, your experience of becoming a literacy specialist as a secondary teacher, I really resonate with that. I was also one of the only secondary teachers in my literacy specialist program as well. And what I really noticed was that, number one, it was really hard for me to teach English if my students were not accessing the text. that was incredibly difficult. And I also noticed that the text that they wanted to access and were choosing to access, often at the same time they were being identified as struggling readers by our assessment measures, were multimodal texts, meaning they were comics, they were not just giant blocks of print. And so I started using technology. This was in 2007 or so. I started to try to meet my students where they were, and where they were was graphic novels and internet visuals and internet text. And so then slowly from there, I just started reading graphic novels, as their educator, so I could talk to them about it. Then I had my own kids and they wanted to, read graphic novels. I did push them into it, but that's okay. They like it now. And I have 2 kids, a 10 and a 12-year-old. My 10-year-old reads almost exclusively graphic novels, and is, the challenge is different for me to try to keep her in novels that are appropriate in content, but hard enough for her that she stays in it, right? And my son has really moved more into, and I bring in gaming just because it is another multimodal information medium that I work in a lot. He's moved, primarily into, he loves text-based novels about science fiction and futurism and things like that. What I notice from both of your stories thus far is that, first of all, the trend of marginalization, that feeling marginalized, is one that I hear again and again in my role as the director of education. When I'm very lucky that I get to hear these stories almost every day from people. And it's the same thing. Comics, helped me belong or didn't, right? Or, but that sense of belonging walks hand in hand with this medium in a way that I haven't seen with other books and other media. And so that's why I'm here doing this, is because it's the most important, it's why we are. I'm pretty convinced. So I'll stop there.
Yeah, and I wish we could have you in every state, because I know like field trips with like school field trips to the Comic-Con museum and the education space would just be an amazing thing to do.
It's, if I can just toot our own horn, I have the best job. In every class that we have, basically we start out asking, do you know what Comic-Con is? Do you know what the museum is? And couple kids might raise their hand, like if they've been to the convention for some reason. And but what we slowly notice is, in a class of about 30 kids, about 5 of them are our people. And they are learning that there are people in that moment. in a field trip to the Comic-Con Museum, which we're just like, we're right here. Come back. Like, you can come here anytime. If you can't get in, just here's my card. Like, so it's a delight.
I love that so much. Tim, thanks for hanging in with us. So how about you? What's your origin story there with comics?
Okay, so still remember it. I was like 5 years old, down this corner store in town with my dad, and you get milk, and there's a rack of comics, and I picked one up. Hercules Unbound #4, art by Jose Luis Lopez Garcia, and inked by Wally Wood. So of course I'm hooked for life, right? And then so I devoured it, and of course I was a chubby kid. My mom didn't, thought maybe as a motivator rather than like getting me candy and stuff like that, she picked me up comics, and that was mainlined from that. It hooked me hard. So I collected seriously for years, and then when I was in high school, I worked out this whole like scam to meet Al Williamson, right? So my mom saw this feature on the afternoon news show. It was like Out of This World cartoons because he's doing a Star Wars comic strip at the time, and I was thought, hey, I talked to my high school art teacher and see if he can invite Al to give like a talk at our school, and then we'll meet and I'll become his teenage sidekick and whatnot. But I was like, very flattered for the invite, but said, this young man sounds really motivated, so just send him down to meet me. And so my mom drove me down. We spent the afternoon in the studio, and there's like huge pages on the wall of Alex Raymond, this Flash Gordon Jungle Jim Sundays. There's Hal Foster's on the wall, and I was just, my mind was blown. Yeah, and he's like sitting there, and he picks up my sketchbook, and I'm like, I was absolutely just gobsmacked that he was drawing with a brush. Here I use a crow quill and tentacle pens, and he's like, hey, he picks up my sketchbook, and he like whips out a Zarkov on a page of my sketchbook. I was like, and he gave me the brush, Winsor Newton Series 7 #2, and it was magical, right? And so my mom's sitting there the whole time, and he's just very charming and a complete gentleman, and it was just wonderful afternoon. But then after I got my driver's license, then I'd go down and like hang out in his studio. We'd go out and have lunch, and it was amazing. And I'm like, I remember I was just like so like starry eyed. He says like, what's the matter with you? Why are you acting like this? And I says like, you're Al Williamson, don't you understand? He's like, look, he says, until I cure cancer or do something important, then genuflect. But other than that, I'm just a guy who draws for a living. And it's just amazing. So, but yeah, I could have lunch and listen to stories about the Flegel gang, Frazetta and Krenkel and Reed Crandall, and it was just amazing. So I would go down there like for years. It's like when I was in college, I'd go down and see him, and for years after. It was wonderful. And during school, I also weaseled my way in. I'm seeing a pattern here, to connect with Kamiko, with Bob Schreck and Diana Schutz. I had an advertising copywriting class, and assignment was to find a local business to write a campaign for him. So I called up Bob Schreck and went out to meet with him, and he says, you do design work? And I said, yeah. He says, well, why don't you, we need an assistant to Rick Taylor, the art director. So why don't you start? And so it was a great job in school. I got to, clean up art pages and Grendel and Johnny Quest and Adam Hughes on Maze Agency, and it was lots of fun. And but yeah, and then after that, I did small indie stuff a lot. After I graduated from school, I spent most of my time in doing as an illustrator for editorial, and most of my career has been design work and website development. But yeah, I mean, so I've done done intermittent books here and there, and in terms of like graphic novels and whatnot, and work on the next book, Benjamin Franklin's Way Wealth and Other Words of Wisdom. And it's always been part of my DNA. So it's, it seems like everything else is done to support that, that the medium that I love. Yeah, so it's been a great adventure.
That's like incredible. Um, it's just funny that we all have a different origin story. But I mean, the word passion gets overused, but I think people watching this can very much tell, like Emily was saying, like our people. I mean, I have kids that if they walk into my into my classroom the first day of school, and like they know, and they look around my room and they see what's there, and they're like, oh, okay. Um, and so for teachers and educators and parents who watch this, like you have those kids in your classroom. You have those kids coming in your library. And the other part of that is if you're nervous about, like when I work with education students, I'm like, listen, you don't have to be a comic book expert on this. You have kids in your classroom who will be, and tap them. Like I don't know much about manga and anime, but my kids pull me in and they're like, hey, did you read this? Did you read that? And those sorts of things. And so you can kind of take that stress off you. You don't have to be the expert in the room, because there are kids in there who are. Um, and with Tim, with your story, like my son now, he's in 10th grade. My little reluctant reader who is like such a he loves reading. He's now in tech school for graphic design, um, and it's the first time that I've seen him like just absolutely love what he's doing during the school day. Nothing against the history teachers or anybody else, but he finally had a chance to like, okay, this is what I want to do. And I wish I knew that when I was in 10th grade. Like he knows now where he's going, and the super kind people in the industry who have helped him and made suggestions, and like it's always amazing, like your experience, Tim. But all the people that I've come across who are involved, and I'm not going to name drop, but the people that I come across in this industry are just like they're just people, and it's hard to get past that. And they're like, oh, well, I'm not so special. Like you're saying, like I just draw comics and graphic novels, but when they hear that kids are reading their work, when they hear that their stuff is being used in the classroom, it is like you just see like they just love that. It really means a lot to them. Um, I have, as usual, as a teacher, I'm over prepared, and so I have a gazillion questions. I think maybe we should combine two, so we have enough time to talk about these. So I had one where like share your thoughts on comics and education, and then the other, what do you see as the importance of comics in our culture? Like I know we've got museum space, we have authors, we have graphic medicine. So I thought if we could just kind of combine those together, your expertise and your role, and the importance of comics in that role. And so I'll let you all talk because I talk ad nauseum about all these things. And drawing people to my website and things like that. There's free resources on teaching resources and things like that. But if you would just kind of speak to that within your own specialty, and that's what I love is how we kind of just organically came together. I asked people on social media, like, hey, who wants to get together and talk about Eisner and comics? And it's kind of interesting that the four of us got together with all these different backgrounds. So again, we'll just stick with the same folks, with Matthew, Emily, and then Tim. Just if you would speak to, and I'm talking too much here, but the role of comics in your expertise there.
Yeah, sure. I mean, um, okay, so I'll stick to the graphic medicine part. There's so many directions I could go with this. Um, so I'm in a medical school setting. It's somewhere, so an academic health sciences library is not somewhere that most people expect to find comics still. Um, we're making moves and changing that. Like every time I turn around, someone's asking me for advice on how to start doing this, and I happily give that advice. But so there's a changing kind of culture here where we're seeing comics as accepted and allowable in these spaces. We're seeing people literally use comics as a form of ethnographic research happening where people will do interviews and they'll record what's happening in a comic format and then share that back with the interviewee and be like, is this what you said? How do you this look? And then there's a conversation happening of where you're gaining insight into a community, but you're also getting to tell someone's story. And so that's an amazing like research tool. Um, sorry, there are so many thoughts in my head about how this is important and matters that I'm gonna like jump from one thing to another. Um, and I could go on forever, so I'll try to be shorter about it. But like, and then something I always quote from the Graphic Medicine Manifesto, which is like the original kind of key academic oriented text for graphic medicine, um, is that they purposely named it a manifesto because the idea was that we're going to use comics to disrupt the norms of the experience of healthcare and the power dynamics in the practice of medicine, right? The idea is that if someone can express their story and it can be in a comic, it can be in anything else, but this patient-centered approach where there are conflicting stories about what's happening. Like what I think my doctor is saying is not always what my doctor thinks they're saying. My experience of pain is not necessarily your experience of pain. And so the ability for multiple people to share conflicting perspectives, and that doesn't necessarily mean that any of those perspectives are false or one is more true than the other, right? Like there's this messiness of fact and fiction there with experience. And comics kind of let you play with that in a way that not every other medium lets you play with. Um, and so that's a big piece. Like I spend a lot of my time focused on the reading of comics and the sharing of stories more so than the creation side because I am not an artist necessarily. Um, but the part I do like to do, I do artistic like exercises and things with medical students. And I borrowed this from M.K. Serwick. She's another graphic medicine person, a nurse, a cartoonist. You should read her book, Taking Turns. She edited the Eisner Award-winning anthology about menopause. It's a comics anthology about menopause. Uh, but she uses crayons with students, especially with health sciences students, because crayons are, no one is drawing a fine line with a crayon. Okay, I'm sure there are experts that can, whatever, but like it's forgiving in a way that it's acceptable to fail at drawing with a crayon. And medical students are afraid of failing beyond what any other student I've ever interacted with. Like these are the highest of high achievers, especially in an environment like where I am. And so making them feel comfortable doing something they're not necessarily automatically good at is important for a lot of reasons, but then it gives them a chance to express their stress and discomfort. Um, Another colleague of mine, Dr. Michael Green at Penn State, um, he teaches fourth year medical students, and their final project is a comic they have to draw. And they've done like thematic analysis of what these students are drawing, and it highlights like the toxic culture of medical training. And they looked at it through the lens of horror, like these students were drawing like horror comics about what it's like to work in the clinic because of the power imbalances. And so you can use these as a chance to impact the culture in these environments because people can share their stories in a way that can be more anonymized, right? A character in a comic could be anybody, right? So there's so much power and opportunity here. I'm going to stop because I'll just keep rambling forever.
But I think that's a great point. I think comics, the power of comics is, like you said, patient centered, but we are literally involved with the character in a way that we're not in prose. And so, like when I use the March trilogy based on John Lewis's life in the civil rights movement up until the election of President Obama, my students get to know him in a way and feel empathetic and feel involved in the events of what's going on. So that's a really important part, and I appreciate you sharing that. All right, Emily, how about you?
Can you repeat the question so I can focus my answer appropriately?
So it's a simple question. No, it's not. It's so in your expertise and what you do. So for you, it might be easier. The first thought was about what do you see about the role of comics in education, but then maybe also in the museum space.
Okay, great. So I think, kind of just as I was referencing in my previous answers, like the most powerful thing about any text is that people choose to consume it. That's it, right there. It doesn't matter necessarily what the format of that text is. That is less important than the choice, in my view. And so, because you're consenting to that text, and so that is not often how people experience text in schools, which for better or for worse, it is also our job to widen people's perceptions of what is possible so that they can make better choices. But I think as educators, we really walk that line every single day between how can I give you something, where can I find you, in that thing you're going to choose, but also I'm going to help you make a better choice. So there's that. I also think when it comes to the format of our information, moving forward right now in our world, it's multimodal. It is almost never a block of text. No person who is in communications would say, I know, we're the best way we're going to get our point across is just a giant block of words. Like, and so I think that when it comes to, you know, comics and education, and particularly in our museum, we're kind of selling two things. Number one, that if you need to let people choose what they want to read, and you need to see the choices that people make as valid and capable of supporting rigorous analysis. You know, I can get into it with you about you know, British Bake Off if you'd like, for many hours at a time. We can be very rigorous about that. And I honestly, it's like, you know, drinking from the fire hose of interest at my job, you know, with the way that people come and want to talk to me about what they care about. And so, you know, when I do professional development for a lot of administrators, a lot of, you know, county and state level officials about reading policy, I'm trying to tell them that we're barking up the wrong tree in terms of standardized testing passages, in terms of how we're preparing people and assessing people, that we're actually assessing people on something that does not transfer into our daily life. And so I bet, Tim, you know, I could go on for a long time there, so I'm gonna pause.
If I could summarize pretty much everything you said, reading is reading, right?
Yes.
And we need to move past that stigma of yeah. So thank you very much. Like I said, we need to replicate you and the museum and everything. I would love that.
Oh gosh, that scares me. I'm working so hard.
And Tim, so I'd be curious, particularly as an author, you know, maybe interactions you've had with students from that side of things, and kind of what you do in the education space and all that.
Well, I'm gonna kind of like back it up and talk about like, you know, in terms of like, you know, finding something, you know, coming at it from the standpoint of a journalist, finding something which is not commonly known, right? So when I was working on We Survived the Holocaust, I know from the oral testimony that we had from Bluma, we knew, and the family knew, that she worked on painting planes, right, in one of the camps. And so I had, you know, chased it down and, you know, realized that she was at one of the Kuno works, one of the sub camps of Dachau. And so when I was communicating with researchers at Dachau as well as Bergen-Belsen, but when I even like was able to surface her prisoner number from Dachau. The family didn't know that, and was able to determine that the site that she worked on in the Kuno works, they were working on the Messerschmitt Me-262, which was the first jet fighter. You know, the family didn't know that, you know, and she probably didn't even realize it at the time, but was able to surface that as part of the story. And just to find that piece and, you know, bring that into, you know, the narrative, that's what really kind of is one of those sweet spots for me, because it's teaching with comics, right? It's like finding those pieces of the story which aren't really like, you know, front and center, but nevertheless, it's like a really crucial piece of information, you know. So, and in terms of like how that, you know, resonates with students, it's I want to tell those stories that, you know, frankly, I want to, you know, dig in deeper on things that I don't know. You know, that's when I start going on the rabbit hole. When I get my teeth in something, if it's something I don't know, or if I want to know more about, that's what I want to bring to the table. Because if I don't know it, then somebody else, you know, probably doesn't know it either. Right. So it's all about like, you know, surfacing this information, making educational experience for all of us. And, you know, and we all learn. And, you know, and what's even better about that is to, you know, develop that, you know, identify that itch that you need to scratch, and then you keep digging and finding other sort of pieces to solve that. Other information sources to really kind of continue down that path.
And I'll speak to that. Like when a kid, like I had said, kids are more likely to pick up a comic or graphic novel than anything else. I mean, we know that, me included. So they're going to pick up a book like yours, like they do in my classroom, and then they're going to want to learn more. They're going to want to read more. They're going to want to research more. They're going to but on a topic that they might not normally have picked the book up on in the first place.
Yeah, yeah, for sure.
I know librarians who purposely put the graphic novel collection in the back of the library because it forces the kids to go through the library because they know where they're going.
Yeah.
So I would say, we're about at an hour here. And I feel like we could go on for quite a lot longer. But if you go to, again, to the teachingwithcomics.com website, there's the Will Eisner link right at the top. And it has resources, a lot of things that we talked about here, teaching materials, all kinds of information. And I really want to thank all three of you for being here on this. I mean, this is a perfect Saturday, and we'll be sure to share all this out. If you have any kind of closing thoughts or anything like that before we close out, the floor is yours. Maybe next projects or next thoughts or next ideas or.
I can just put some plugs in for Comic-Con stuff. First of all, come to San Diego Comic-Con. If you are not able to get into the convention, that is okay. There's plenty to do outside of the convention. We have people who visit and just participate in all of the stuff on site. One of those things is Comic-Con for Educators and Librarians. It happens at the San Diego Public Library. We program it for free. And it's full of all the people that you would want to talk to and listen to and connect with. And it is the vibe of Comic-Con, only all of our educator folks. So please come on down. And if you are in San Diego and you want to come to the Comic-Con Museum, please shoot me an email at education@comic-con.org, and I will work with you.
And I have to say, somebody who's been part of that presentations twice now, the top of the library there has the most beautiful view. It's just an amazing space.
Yeah, the top floor of that library is very cool, and I'm jealous.
It's so beautiful, and they're amazing. Sorry, go ahead.
No, you're cool. I unfortunately will not be at San Diego this year because it's too close to the Graphic Medicine Conference in Ireland. I would feel bad, but I'd rather go to Ireland than Southern California. I'm sorry. It's too hot. I will be at WonderCon at the end of the month if anyone's around. And I'll be there with Fanbase Press mostly. And then if anyone's going to ALA Annual, I'm always there. So feel free to come by and say hi and do fun stuff.
Matthew, I'll definitely try to find you. We have our annual education and industry connection panel that I run at WonderCon and Comic-Con on Sunday. So I will be there, and I'll come find you.
Awesome.
Sounds great. And yeah, I'll just close out. We just released a Spanish edition of We Survived the Holocaust. And
No, we did not just lose him at the very end.
Go buy Tim's book.
Yes. Although I will say, since he mentioned Spanish, I love when we use comics in language classes. Like you can use it in a Spanish class, a French class, a German class. Really that multimodal, that the built-in scaffolding to kind of make all those connections. So yeah, I really appreciate everybody's time. I feel so bad. Literally the last second of all this. So I will, let's see. So I have to click a bunch of buttons, but so we'll stop on Facebook. And then we will stop recording.